Hey, everybody, it's our second show of 2026, and we are continuing our challenge for the state of Connecticut. We have a week without corruption, just 1 week this year. Seems like a tall order, apparently. Catherine is here to talk about some of the corruption issues we've seen this week and also her new investigation, Overtime. This is Inside Investigators Inside Update. I'm the editor, Connor Dragotis, and today I'm joined by Catherine Revelou, investigative reporter. Catherine, how you doing today? A lot of online work, watching speeches yesterday, live tweeting the whole thing.
Yeah, yesterday was a long day at the State House.
It was much appreciated. It really, I think, gave the opportunity to get the highlights without having to go through. It just takes them so long to even get started with these things. I feel like the process is not streamlined by any stretch.
Yeah, it is not, I feel like there's a lot of self-congratulations that goes on from elected officials, which slows things down too.
Yes. Well, hey, all the world's a stage. I want to talk about what you saw yesterday, what you heard yesterday. But before we get to the kickoff to the 2026 legislative session, I want to talk about your investigation because it's fascinating to see. Amid all of the complaints about efficiency, about spending, about all these discussions about money, there's this big overtime problem that is happening, but as I understand it, and I'm hoping you could shed a little bit of light on this, information's not easy to come by.
Yeah, I think this falls into what has unfortunately become a category of investigations that I've done. It goes all the way back to when you hired me almost 3 years ago, where we decide we want to find data to get to the root of some sort of political issue or problem in Connecticut and find out that it either doesn't exist or it's incredibly hard to come by. Right. And, the basis of this investigation was looking at OFA's quarterly reports about state employee overtime spending, which goes up pretty much consistently every quarter, and saying, hey, what's at the root of this? Yes, they are analyzing data from state payroll, which is based off of reports that's in Core CT, but that's just a summary of the amount of overtime payment that employees are receiving. That doesn't say anything about what policies state agencies have, what kinds of overtime requests are employees submitting, how much time are they for, how are they getting approved or disapproved. So we turn to the Freedom of Information Act to try to find out, answers to those questions. And, if you read the investigation, you can see that it was actually an incredibly frustrating process where we were consistently told by state agencies, go to open payroll, overtime policies are in the CBAs. And those things are true. But again, they don't get to the really granular level of data that we're looking for.
I feel like that's been a consistent problem too, and I think it's a credit to you and our entire investigative team that you actually want the details, you want the underlying documents, and I think what we have seen, I'll briefly mention, I think with the CSCU and Yukon sexual misconduct investigation, we just got alerted yesterday that they had more than 20,000 pages of responsive documents that they had not provided to us previously. So again, in this case, we see a desire to understand the underlying issue, a desire to understand the data, a desire to then translate that out and fulfill our mission of rooting out corruption. But we're being kneecapped, right? Is that just the law? Is that individual actors? Is it a structural problem? Help me understand why this is happening.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a combination of things. And right, I mean, we are primarily investigative journalists. That's in my job title. So I feel like that's, what you hire me to do. And
Very much
I
so.
think it's a combination of things because, even in this investigation, and you'll see it, there were agencies that complied with these requests and gave us underlying data, and there were others that did not. So I don't think we can attribute it to a universal unwillingness, by state agencies to not turn this data over, although it is certainly the case in some of them, and we have documented that numerous times. But there are also structural issues, which again we've written about before, where one of the very first investigations I did 3 years ago was trying to figure out if we have a plea bargaining crisis in the state of Connecticut, and being told that like the state simply does not record detailed data about the kinds of plea bargains that are offered. So we can't answer that questions. And that is down to old-fashioned record-keeping systems that have not been updated. That's an issue we've had with DOC numerous times. Both you and I have filed FOIA requests on multiple different issues and been told, oh, DOC doesn't record data like that. And in fact, that was an issue in this investigation where DOC came back to us and says, we have a list of officers who sign up for overtime, but we don't record, the actual hours of overtime that individual employees work, which, I don't understand how that can be a system or a process that a state agency is following. Like, how are you not actually tracking?
It seems like it would be a good financial practice, as someone who manages budgets. I feel like that's kind of the bare bones minimum of what you would want to understand as a responsible financial manager. But it also seems, again, it stretches credulity here. Like I'm not sure but like no one is understanding. No one's interested in understanding. I know that this is becoming more of a conversation. I think that has been identified as an area that there are concerns about, but there, as you allude to in the investigation here, or maybe even say outright, the data doesn't necessarily back up the popular narratives, right? I mean, and you could get into this in a little bit more detail, but my understanding, we saw this in the comments, and I had to reply, "Hey, did you read the investigation?" But people are like, "Oh man, well, if you just hired more staff, the overtime would go down." That's not what's actually happening here, right?
Right, correct. I mean, and we looked at, the two leading arguments as to why overtime spending keeps going up are overtime spiking, which is, state employees who are reaching retirement age are working in an incredible number of overtime hours because that factors into their pension calculation. And there is evidence that that is happening. However, it doesn't explain the problem across the board. And then on the other side of that coin, you have people like the state employees unions who are saying, state employee hiring is down, and that's documented. And so these overtime requests are driven by people who have to work extra hours because they're doing their jobs plus, the jobs of people who no longer work at these agencies. And again, there is evidence that this is happening. A lot of the requests that we did manage to get for this investigation showed that they were trying to fill in positions or to help train new positions. But again, there's also data from OFA that shows that even in state agencies who hired extra people, their overtime hours went up quarter to quarter. So neither of those explanations, while there is evidence that both of them are occurring, fully explain what's going on here. And just on the point of, of this data, I think tools like CT Open Data State Payroll are great because they do make data available to the public. I think you and I are both of the position that basically every document that government's produced should just be publicly available. But like at the same time, excuse me, those tools are of limited usefulness if you're being referred to them and state agencies are saying, hey, this data is here, even though it doesn't answer the underlying question. And they have underlying records that would, but they don't want to do the work to give them to you. They want to just point you to the public data portal.
Which, I understand. I empathize with from like a human being who is busy in their job point of view. But I think that there also needs to be some compassion for a curious public and certainly curious investigative reporters. But I think a lot of people have these questions, right? Because it does translate to real dollars out of their pocket. It results in a change in their quality of life. It changes how you shop at the grocery store, right? I mean, I've said this before, but I'm so fascinated with the conversations that we have with folks who reach out and they say, hey, as a result of there being lesser corruption, here's what I've gone ahead and done with it, right? Here's how it's positively impacted my life. That's ultimately what really matters, right? Getting rid of corruption is great, but I also I'd be thrilled to just not have stories about corruption because they aren't happening, right? Like the content itself is only valuable because of what it can bring about. it's good writing in the meantime. It's interesting, it's entertaining, but I don't want to pretend that like we should be doing this just for the sake of doing it. We want to actually see the eradication of this stuff on the other end. It doesn't happen in a bubble, and I don't think that can be made clearly enough.
Yeah, absolutely.
When we look at this, and I want to, I guess, give you the opportunity if there's anything else on overtime. It's a great investigation. There's, I think it's as you have carved out a niche here for some really great data opportunities to talk about this. Anything else that you want to highlight from that piece? Otherwise, of course, guys, go read the darn thing. It's fantastic. It's pretty to look at. It's a good investigation. Anything else you want to highlight?
Yeah, I think I'd just direct people to the piece, and especially the portion about the FOIA issues that we had, right? We had to file a series of 3 separate requests to try to get overtime policies, to try to get timesheets submitted by state employees, right? And again, this is an instance where we had to hit upon a magic keyword, which was timesheets, to get the actual documents that we want. And that is a huge, huge FOIA problem, particularly in this state. So, I talk about that. I've talked about that in Transparency Update, which is linked in the story. I talk about it in the story. So, I think that is a crucial element of this story too.
Listen, you got to use the phrase FOIA whack-a-mole, which I really
Yeah.
appreciated. I think that's the second time we've been able to use that, and it's such a great description for what you're having to go through here. And it's not even fun, not even the fun arcade game. We also, I guess, moving on from the investigation, I want to make sure that we have ample time here to talk about the start of the legislative session. So this is a short session this year, so they're limited in what they're actually going to do, but that certainly didn't stop the pomp and circumstance, didn't stop the speeches. There are ideas being put forward that will likely have financial impact, but they're also trying to rein in some bad behaviors. I guess talk about what the priorities were as you heard it in the speeches yesterday, and also, I guess we could probably talk about the Senate a little bit as you did provide that update, and Brandon had additional coverage of that this morning.
Yeah, right. I mean, we knew yesterday that OMB was going to preview the governor's budget adjustments. We knew Lamont was going to talk about it in his State of the State address. What we didn't know until the night before session was that the $500 million emergency fund that the legislature passed last November in response to what at the time was the federal government shutdown and, the potential that federal programs were going to be cut, was going to be extended, right? It expired yesterday when they gavelled the session in, and they passed an emergency certification bill in the Senate yesterday to continue the right. There's about $330 million left in that fund that hasn't been spent yet, that the governor and OMB now has the power to continue to spend, even though the legislature is in session and could pass bills through the end of fiscal year 2027.
Nothing so permanent as a temporary program and all that. We can definitely keep an eye on how these funds are going to continue to be used, but I think it is an interesting topic, and not to go too far into it, but it's an interesting moment in time for these conversations to be happening. Everything was focused around what's happening outside of Connecticut and how it's impacting inside Connecticut, right? Like this framing of how power structures are shifting. We should be aware of that, and I want our readers to be aware of that, because amid change, there are going to be opportunities for corruption, and we want to hear about them in real time. There's nothing worse than hearing about something that happened 5 years ago that was corrupt, and folks are just coming to us for a story. We want to be in the thick of it, so these things aren't festering and being stuck along the way. I also do. I want to talk a little bit about corruption as not as a concept, but we watched the speech yesterday, and Lamont's speech specifically was bookended with Thomas Paine quotes, right? Or at least Thomas Paine sympathies. And I see continuing this morning, that kind of these are the times that try men's souls sort of stuff. So I do have to thank Lamont. He gave me the opportunity, or reason to pick up Common Sense and the Rights of Man last night. A little light reading for my own edification and fun. But really, what I was thinking about and what I was looking for is, okay, yes, that's a view of Thomas Paine, but what did the guy have to say about corruption, right? We know that corruption is kind of this perennial problem that keeps coming up. And I wanted to read this quote from The Rights of Man, Part 2, for those out there, which reads, "When extraordinary power and extraordinary pay are allotted to any individual in a government, he becomes the center round which every kind of corruption generates and forms. Give to any man $1 million a year and add thereto the power of creating and disposing of places at the expense of a country, and the liberties of that country are no longer secure. What is called the splendor of a throne is no other than the corruption of the state. It is made up of a band of parasites living in luxurious indolence out of the public taxes." And I got to be honest, as we're seeing 500 million, 28.7 billion thrown around, those are big numbers. And obviously, we're not going to do the, dollar value from 17 whenever to 2026. But I think the point does hold up here that we want to be aware of, and we want to be hearing from people when these centers are formed, right? We've heard a lot about this FBI inquiry into nonprofit spending, alleged fraud, handshake deals, friends giving money to each other. It's a problem. And if you're out there, right, I see comments coming in from Facebook here about, the way that money is being spent. Some kind words. Raymond, thank you for your compliments there. Catherine, this says, "Great work. Keep it up. I have no doubt that that will continue." These are the kind of things that we want to be hearing about. And I don't think that we, as we look back at the historical record, I don't love debating historical fact because it's always up to interpretation. But I was thankful for the opportunity to read that point and just recognize, again, this is why we're doing this. And this problem continues to occur now hundreds of years that we're seeing this. And I do think that we have some of the solution here with transparency, with bringing this information to the public. This is really important work. And Catherine, I want to give you the opportunity to, throw your 2 cents in there as well about, what you're seeing in terms of, if you have any thoughts about the speech and Thomas Paine, of course, but just, what we should be thinking about in terms of, as this say, the forms of corruption that folks can be looking out for and helping us expose.
Yeah, I mean, I think on that point, the corruption that we have covered, right, and especially that our colleague Mark Fitch has covered pretty extensively, that's going on with Pura and Senator McCrory and some of the nonprofits in the state. It was a very rosy speech from Lamont yesterday, and a lot of that elements were missing. Lamont had a big applause line about Pura holding the utilities accountable, when in reality, Marissa Gillette just resigned. And those same utility companies are currently winning multiple victories in court because of the way that Pura has operated. There was reference to in Lamont's budget, there's this idea of creating a nonprofit advisory board with the goal of, kind of streamlining things and helping them navigate, the changing social services landscape, as decisions come out of the Trump administration. But again, really no mention of the fact that, a Connecticut legislator and multiple nonprofits are currently involved in federal investigations.
Do you think that that's I don't know. I don't even want to say it's not poo-pooing it. But it was surprising to me that he went so hard in the opposite direction, specifically pointing out instances where there are known, documented, and undoubtedly true problems. It seemed very odd to be like, "Oh, no, this is going great." I didn't get it, and maybe I'm missing something, but what's the deal there in your view?
Yeah, all right. I mean, I think I really hate speeches like that, because I think they are inherently kind of political stump speeches in nature, and we have an election coming up. So of course they're going to focus on certain things, right? I mean, and obviously this is my opinion here, but I think some of the negative things tend to get minimized in those contexts because, and again, I think they are very much playing to the audience where you are in front of legislators, constitutional offices, and it is about making people feel good about themselves. That being said, I think you can still acknowledge the fact that these problems are ongoing and are existing. And I think it does a disservice to constituents who were watching yesterday to not acknowledge those things.
I really would have liked to hear a couple lines or see more in the speech that was acknowledging the ongoing corruption problems as well. I think that there's an opportunity there. There's a vacuum of leadership, and I'm not even saying government leadership. I'm just saying generally. I think right now the mantle pretty squarely falls with the media to call out corruption, which that's why we exist. It was part of the reason that we created this newsroom, is to make sure that someone was doing it in a responsible way. But at the same time, I appreciate it. And when there are people who say it privately, I think I just wish it was said publicly more, because I am optimistic when we talk to hundreds of people every single week about the corruption they're experiencing, or various people who we need to talk to uncover what actually happened. And by and large, people are anti-corruption. I very rarely hear someone say like, "Oh, no, I'm a huge fan of initiating violence or diminishing wealth by force or fraud." Like, those conversations don't really happen. But I do find that when it gets to the public eye, you're right. This feel-goodery is part of the political calculus or coalition building that, I don't know, maybe it does further political careers, but is it really solving the problems that the positions ostensibly exist to fix in the first place? So I don't know. Do you have more on that? Otherwise, I can move on, because I want to give away some free bumper stickers as well. So I'll move on to a more lighthearted topic after this.
Yeah, the people love freebies. Let's give them what they want.
People, they do. Yes, indeed. All right, folks, just want to throw out there, as we get closer to wrapping up this episode, one of the things that we have been trying to do is grow the way that we're doing our marketing. And frankly, bumper stickers are an easy one. We have Inside Investigator bumper stickers. If you're already subscribed to us, just send an email, reply to any of the emails, just send me your address. I'll send them to you for free. Also, if you're someone who's hearing us for the first time, I know this goes out all over the place. Obviously, you might be watching it live now on Facebook, LinkedIn, or X, but this is also on the radio every single weekend. It's going out to the World Wide Web as well in a variety of formats. Send an email to tips, TIPS, at insideinvestigator.org. Not only is that a great email address to know generally, because when you see something wrong, we want to hear about it, but also, if you send me your address, send me your name, I'll send you over a few bumper stickers. It would help us out with marketing and continuing to grow our reach as we continue to make a push against corruption in the state of Connecticut and beyond. And on top of that, it's just a really great thing to have. I want to be having more conversations with folks who are anti-corruption, who care about rooting out corruption, who want to see people thrive in this state and see those they love, their family members, live better lives, right? When you're post corruption, there's some really cool things you can do, and that's something I want to make sure that we are doing everything in our power to support. Again, that email address is tips@insideinvestigator.org, and we would love to hear from you. Catherine, thank you so much for your investigation, and also for taking time. I think we haven't done like a Twitter takeover live tweet thing in a long time. So I appreciate you just dedicating the hours to follow along, write about it, tweet about it, connect with people. It really does make a difference to keeping folks informed and educated. Anything else that you have for the folks out there before we wrap up today?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I'll say is, day 2 of session, bills are already coming in hot and heavy. I will be closely following FOIA as always this session. We're anticipating quite a few bills to try to limit FOIA in ways that have, what I love to call zombie bills, because no matter how many times you kill them, they just won't die and they keep coming back, as well as some new efforts to try to limit what information is disclosable in response to things that the Trump administration is doing, which is, I think, is a mistake. But I will be paying close attention to that, and we will definitely be covering it.
Fantastic. So much more to come, folks. Thank you for tuning in. Really appreciate those who subscribe, donate, watch, listen, support our anti-corruption work. We'll be back in 2 weeks. And until then, please don't be corrupt.